Dr. Jeremy Cowan has a bachelor's degree in horticulture, an MBA in marketing and management, and his PhD in horticulture is from Washington State University. He's a colleague and a friend. He goes way back. He's an OG of the Morin Academy that goes back before the Morin Academy was even a thing, when we were sitting around in a reading group in my living room around a table discussing Wendell Berry and other authors like that. So it's a real pleasure to welcome him here for a Morin Academy lecture, and I'll go ahead and let Dr. Cowan also introduce himself.
I think, thank you first. Lori did a pretty good job of introducing me. I originally come from California, where I grew up with a large family and a very small house. And one of the things that I found I had a passion for early on in life was growing a garden, not because it was a necessity or anything like that, but it was something to do. And I always liked to see life emerge from what seemed like not life. Of course, that was always balanced with the things that we fought against, which was other lives, the weeds that Lori was talking about. And so when I got to college, which I was a bit of a late bloomer, I really didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. Some days I still don't think I know what I want to be when I grow up. But I knew that I always loved growing plants. And so at one crucial juncture in my life, I decided that I was just going to go get a degree in that because, well, you could get into law school with a degree in anything, or at least that's what I told myself. And it's true. I actually did get into law school and then quickly realized that I didn't want to be a lawyer. I actually never really did, but it was a step towards something like that. Anyways, long story short, uh, that law school led to business school. Business school led to a little bit of a career in real estate, and that all happened in 2007, 2008. I had a very short-lived career in real estate before returning back to get my PhD in horticulture because as the markets were crumbling around my newfound career choice, uh, I found that I was drawn back to the garden, and so I ended up in the garden a whole lot more and taking that to a rather academic extreme as far as earning a PhD in horticulture. And for the last, 12, 11 or 12 years, I've been teaching courses in vegetable production, both at the University of Washington and then at Kansas State University, where I just recently left. Although I'm only partially gone because I'm teaching a course in sustainable agriculture this fall there. So that's a real detailed in some ways and then high level overview of who I am.
All right, well, I think we're ready to go ahead and get started. I'll go ahead and mute folks that aren't muted. And yeah, there we go.
All right, so can you guys see the slides? I think I've got the right thing up.
You do.
Fantastic. So what I wanted to do is more than anything go over terms and some of the ideas around those terms and how they can kind of get people tripped up when it comes to navigating what you would consider a more sustainable lifestyle vis-a-vis food, whether you're growing it, buying it, or anything in between. And so I wanted to talk about those terms, those ideas, and what the implications there are for them at home, because a lot of us probably hear a lot of terms bandied about. We probably interact with those terms quite a bit. And what some of them mean may be a little bit more ambiguous than some people might think, while other terms are going to be extremely technical. So I'm going to spend a bit more time on terms, and then my goal is to try to leave a lot of the what can I do about it towards the end, and especially for the Q&A, because honestly, trying to figure out what sustainable agriculture even is, I think is something that more than anything requires a committee versus an expert. That's not to say that experts aren't necessary in that area, but defining sustainability is going to be a bit of a trick. So let's move forward, maybe. There we go. Why does any of this matter? Why do we talk about sustainability? Why do I want to talk about terms? This is a pretty simple image somebody took of the egg section at their local grocery store. And eggs are a prime example of heavily marketed on the package, but maybe a whole lot less meaning in the marketing. And so every day we're faced with choices, but perhaps depending on how diligent you are, that those choices are being made without reliable information. And even though we're overloaded with information, most of that is little more than just trying to entice you to pull the trigger on buying that particular product versus actually educating you about the product itself. So we get inundated with labels, and labels have power because labels are trying to communicate something, but it's trying to communicate it with an air of authority. Some of the labels on here have meaning. Actually, most of these labels actually have meaning. The one that doesn't is this cage-free label here. There are standards around cage-free, but as far as I've seen, there isn't a single standards. There's not a single entity tasked with those particular standards, and they vary from place to place. So seeing something that says certified cage-free is going to have perhaps a little bit less meaning than something like USDA organic or non-GMO verified or animal welfare approved, which I'll talk about. And I'm going to talk about most of these labels as we go. So what does it really mean? Sustainable agriculture is a term that's been used for quite a while, and I've heard people describe it in many different ways. The most crass definition I think I've ever received is here in Kansas, where I've been told that if I can buy my seed for next year and pay my mortgage, then I'm sustainable. Nothing else really matters unless those things happen. And until those things happen, I don't care about anything else. Now, I've added a little bit extra to that, but you can judge for yourself whether or not just being able to buy your seed and pay your mortgage is truly sustainable, or if that's just going to get you muddled through to the next year in hopes that you can just rinse and repeat. So in 1990, Congress, in passing the Farm Bill, defined sustainable agriculture from a legal perspective, meaning that if you're going to use this term, it's got to have a meaning, and here's what we think it means. And so here's what it's going to legally mean. There's 5 components to it: an integrated system of plant and animal production practices having a site-specific application that over the long term will 1, satisfy human food and fiber needs, 2, enhance environmental quality and the natural resource base upon which the agricultural economy depends, 3, make the most efficient use of non-renewable resources and on-farm resources and integrate, where appropriate, natural biological cycles and controls. 4, sustain the economic viability of farm operations, or in other words, pay for the seed and mortgage. And 5, enhance the quality of life for farmers and society as a whole. Now, I kind of rode the idea of the crass definition of if I can buy my seed and pay my mortgage, then I'm sustainable. Maybe a little bit harder than it should, because if you can't buy your seed and you can't pay your mortgage, you don't really have the opportunity to meet any of these other requirements. So satisfying human food and fiber needs, hopefully most agricultural operations are growing to that end. And so it's kind of the easy one there. Now, that's not to say that we're going to completely satisfy all human food and fiber needs from any given operation or even a countrywide agricultural food production system, but that's one of the first and most important ideas. Sustaining the economic viability follows from that, and once that's been accomplished, most growers then will do what they can to encourage their farm to meet the other definitions there. Certified organic. Now, this one I'm going to be on for a little bit. I think when a lot of us think about organic, especially if you don't go out and look deeper, we think of something like this, where you can see freshly tilled soil right next to a very densely packed bed of lettuce, right next to some matured and perhaps over maturing sweet corn, followed by what's probably a chicken coop, right? Highly diverse. People pushing wheelbarrows instead of fueling up combines. But in reality, the lion's share of the organic that you're going to see out there in the marketplace is probably grown in a farm looking more like this. Now, I honestly think this is an AI image. It could be carrots, but yeah, it's probably, I'm not sure. Anyways, the bottom line is that the majority of organic produce that's brought to market is going to be grown in a context that doesn't really differ much visibly or functionally from a conventional farm. There are some key differences though, and we'll go over those. And this is by no means an exhaustive list of what I've got here for you, but here's a few things. So pesticide use. Organic production avoids synthetic pesticides and uses approved natural substances. There are banned natural substances. There are some approved synthetic substances, but by and large, being synthetic is disqualifying for most products to be used on an organic farm. Whereas conventional does not have any limitation as far as their agricultural production goes, outside of things like making sure that the residues on a particular piece of produce does not exceed any legal limit. GMO ingredients. If you truly want non-GMO diet, then organic is pretty much the only way to get close to guaranteeing that. I say get close because there have been issues in the past of fraud in the organic marketplace where non-organic crops were just being swapped out at the train terminal for conventional or for they're being labeled as organic and then shipped on down the road. In fact, I think the mastermind behind that was working out of Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska. But and I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But anyways, there's a blanket ban on GMO in organic, and that's not just in what's being produced. It's also in animal feeds, and it's also in feedstocks for products that are generated. I'm kind of in a roundabout way saying things like biodegradable plastics. There's some biodegradable, and this is what Lori said is an area of expertise of mine. There are some biodegradable plastics. The polymers themselves are the byproduct of bacterial fermentation. However, the bacteria that are used to create those plastics are genetically engineered. So that plastic would not be allowable in organic because of the genetic modification of the bacteria that's producing the plastic. But there are exceptions that go many different ways. Generally speaking, though, if you want to avoid GM, then organic is the only way to go. Animal welfare. The organic standards do require that all animals produced with an organic label have access to the outdoors and do not get treated prophylactically with hormones. If they're treated at all with hormones or most antibiotics, they get pulled from organic. That particular animal gets pulled out of the rest of the herd and is usually pushed into more of a conventional operation in order to ensure that that one animal that got treated doesn't jeopardize the certification for the rest of the operation. And in fact, for organic operations, it's encouraged that if you need to treat something, that you do treat something so that you don't end up losing an entire herd because of a reticence to use hormones or antibiotics or things like that. Whereas conventional has no limitation on that outside of what the package is labeled for. That's going to be the case for just about all of these. Conventional is not going to have a limitation. The next is environmental impact. In certified organic production, it's required that the grower demonstrates an improvement in soil health, not just maintaining a certain level of quality. It actually needs to improve. There's also got to be a plan for encouraging biodiversity, and for reducing off-site pollutants. The USD organic label is regulated and it is third-party certified. Conventional foods obviously have no particular labeling requirement, especially for fresh produce. Processed foods obviously do. But in order to use the USDA organic label, the one that I showed on the label slide, you have to be inspected. You have to go through the entire process of review. You have to certify and demonstrate that you haven't used any prohibited products on your operation for 3 full years, creating a bit of a hurdle for those new growers that want to get into organic. But the trade-off is after going through those, jumping through those hoops, now you can use that USDA organic label, which is noted, or it's a guarantee that the product meets those standards. The price, typically all of the work that goes into producing an organic crop gets paid back in an increased cost, both because of the certification costs, but also the production costs. When not being able to use the full suite of tools available, speaking mainly of chemical tools, there's more labor that goes into producing a viable crop in an organic farm, and that increases the cost. The last thing I'm going to talk about just really briefly is nutrition. There's not a lot of repeatable research out there showing that there's a big difference between organic and conventional. There are studies that show that on average there are fewer in number pesticide residues on organic produce, meaning that, where an organic product might have 10 different chemical residues on it, a conventional might have 20 or 30 different chemical residues on it. That's not to say that they're being sprayed 20 or 30 times with different chemicals every time, but often there's mixes of chemicals that go out. But as far as the total quantity or toxicity of those residues, there's really not a way of guaranteeing that an organic crop is going to have lower quantity or lower toxicity. Even if a pesticide is natural, meaning it's not synthesized from a petroleum-based process, or any other highly synthetic process, that it's any less toxic. There are many things in nature that will kill you quickly. There are many things in nature that will kill you painfully. And we use those things on some of the pests in an agricultural context. And those things can have equal or sometimes worse effect on humans than some of the conventional synthetic counterparts. So, as far as the actual nutrients of the crops go, there is a number of studies out there that show that they may have higher antioxidant content, but when you're comparing the basic calories, percent fat, carbohydrate, protein, things like that, organic generally doesn't differ much from conventional. But it's in the antioxidants that you might see that. And the interesting thing is that the antioxidants are there in response to increased stress, that increased stress from pests that are perhaps more prevalent in an organic system, but also in an organic system where you have higher biodiversity, you may have not just pests, but plants and other things that can create synergies within that micro ecosystem for an individual plant that can produce higher antioxidant content generally versus other nutrients. The label. So when we're talking about the USDA organic label, there's different words that will often be associated with that label. If you see something that says 100% organic, that means that everything in that ingredient list is approved and allowed in organic production. And so it is guaranteed, as far as the government can guarantee, that you won't have any GMOs, that you won't have any synthetic pesticides or anything like that. That doesn't mean you won't have any pesticides or that you won't have any toxic pesticides. It just means that you won't have any that are not allowed for organic. It has to be, so anytime you use the label, there has to be an organic certification process involved. There are instances where you can use the word organic without the label with no certification. I'll talk about that in just a second. If it says that it's organic, but not using that 100%, it has to be at least 95% organic, meaning that the ingredients have been produced on a farm that is certified for organic production. So all the same general benefits as 100% organic. There's just going to be maybe one or two ingredients that they couldn't source organically. And so as long as it doesn't make up 95% by volume of the product, then they can still label it as organic. One really clear example, anybody who drinks beer out there, is that it's virtually impossible. It's not totally impossible. It's really hard to produce a commercially viable crop of hops organically. And so very often organic beers will have non-organic hops because they're not easy to produce. Something is made with organic if it has at least 70% of the ingredients are certified, and it cannot have any GMOs, even in those other 30%. And the list of ingredients, the ingredients that aren't certified need to at least comply with the national list, meaning that you can't add an ingredient that specific ingredient is not allowed in organic. I'm going to just add one caveat. Even in 100% organic, there are certain ingredients that are completely exempt, and they are water and salt, because how do you have organic water or organic salt? If they are just water and salt, then they're, I guess we would say, inert, at least from an organic perspective. You can say that your product has organic ingredients at any percentage. However, generally speaking, it's not a good idea to put the word organic in large print on the label, but you can put individual ingredients as organic on the ingredients list. And then I said there's one exception to certification and calling something organic. And that is if you produce and sell less than $5,000 annually of a product that you're calling organic, you're exempt from certification. However, it does not entitle you to using the logo. So while you could call something organic, there's no real verification or certification involved in that if you choose to take that small producer exemption. Natural, something naturally flavored with other natural flavors. Now, fortunately, most products are going to have a list in their ingredients list, but not always. Sometimes it just says natural colors or natural flavors. And the government doesn't really do us much help in defining it. The only definition that's listed for the FDA on what natural is a product containing no artificial ingredient or added color and is only minimally processed. Minimal processing means that the product was processed in a manner that does not fundamentally alter the product. The label must include a statement explaining the meaning of the term natural, such as no artificial ingredients or minimally processed or something like that. Does that mean that it's not disgusting? Well, I first heard about how odd this natural term is when I heard about castoreum, which is an extract from the castor sacs of beavers, which are located right around their exit vent. And it was used a lot to make flavorings to enhance vanilla, raspberry, and strawberry flavorings. But it's not used so much anymore, mostly because it's too expensive relative to some of the synthetic products out there. But other things, shellac has been used in food production, especially things like candy, to make the hard shell. And that is secreted by a bug and then used for sealing wood, among other things. You might see that on a label as confectioner's glaze. There's some other things that have interesting origins, but still fit under natural, but we'll keep moving. So many different egg labels, right? A conventional egg doesn't have to have any label. If it does have a label with any meaning, it might fall under one of these. But generally speaking, a conventional egg is an egg laid by a hen who is confined in a cage. And on average, in caged egg production, each bird has about 2/3 of a square foot of space to itself within that cage. Um, that's a very small area per bird. Um, then we have cage free, and you'll see cage free on a lot of egg cartons. Cage free simply means that they don't spend the majority of their life in a cage. They're not laying in the cage necessarily. They can be put in cages temporarily, but they need to have, I think it's 6 hours a day outside of a cage to be called cage free. Or maybe it's the other way around. They can only be in 6 hours, but it's going to have different rules in different places depending on, like California is going to be different than Kansas. But cage free literally just means that they're not in a cage. That doesn't mean that they have much more space. And on average, a cage free bird has maybe 1 square foot in a situation like this one here, which is not terribly uncommon. Then you have free range. This picture is perhaps a little bit deceptive in describing free range simply because the birds are outside. And what I mean by that is free range, in order to be called free range, the bird has to have access to the outdoors. It just has to have access. It doesn't have to actually go outside. And I visited one really large producer once. And when they were describing their free range production, we were in their free range house. There were doors, just like you see in the background here, that the birds could get out really easily. But there were no birds outside. Why that is, I'm not a poultry psychologist, but the person at that farm did humble brag, to borrow a term from the kids these days, that they had it really easy keeping them inside and still calling them free range, because if you keep the door closed for the first so many weeks of their lives and then you open the doors, they never want to go outside anyways. And so I guess call that a trick of the trade or deceptive practices, whatever you want to call it. Ultimately, in order to be called free range, it just has to have access to the outdoors and doesn't actually have to use it. Vegetarian fed, I didn't change the picture on this one because all it means is that they're not fed any animal, including insect-based products. That is an interesting idea simply because chickens are omnivores. They will naturally eat insects, mice, and a number of other vertebrates, snakes, and things like that. And feeding them only on a vegetarian diet may actually be, I don't want to say cruel, but an argument could be made. Pastured. Now, pastured is where we start to see chickens that are probably what most people would think of when they think of free range. A pastured bird has to be on vegetative ground for at least 6 hours a day, meaning that they can go inside of this cage here, or inside of this little house. It's a mobile house in this case. That's where the nest boxes will be for egg laying. Mostly to protect those eggs from scavengers and others, but also to make them easy to find. But ultimately, they can come in at night. They can roost in that tractor, what this would be called sometimes, or in a full-time facility, but they're spending the majority or at least a very large portion of their day out on ground that has vegetation, whether it's grass or not, depends on your particular weeds. But um, one caveat to this is that in order to be pastured, they have to be on vegetative ground, which means that they have to be regularly moved. Because even at relatively low densities, keeping chickens in one spot will result in what I like to call moonscaping. They will literally scratch the earth until it's become scorched, so to speak. Um, them and pigs. The last one that I'm going to put on here is animal welfare approved. This picture doesn't really reflect anything but chickens farther away from the group, but animal welfare approved is a very standardized program for trying to ensure as much as possible the welfare of the chickens. So in an animal welfare approved operation, they have to meet their definition of pastured as far as the number of hours on vegetative ground. But they need full-time access. Now you can close them up at night for safety, but in the waking hours, they need full-time access to outdoors in an area that they're guaranteed a minimum of 4 square feet. I'm sorry, 10 square feet outdoors. Um, Actually, I think there's levels within animal welfare approved. One of the levels is 10 feet per bird outdoors. The other, I think the minimum for any level is 4 feet outdoors. And then indoors is 2 feet. And that higher level, I think it's been a minute since I read those rules, but uh, I think the higher level is 4 square feet indoors, which still isn't that much space. It's 2 feet by 2 feet. But it is palatable from a producer's perspective, who every additional square foot of ground per bird is just costing them money, or at least potential revenue. So grass-fed and grain-fed is another one that we see. This one's probably a whole lot easier to detect the differences once you've started eating. Now, going back to the birds, the pastured birds will tend to have darker yolks, but when analyzing the actual nutrient content of them, you might find more magnesium in a pastured egg, but you might find more potassium in a cage or indoor grown egg. So there's trade-offs. Flavor wise, some people might be able to detect the difference. Some people might not, as far as the birds go. In beef, grass-fed versus grain-fed is much easier to detect for the average eater because one of the reasons that we grain feed, not only does it grow those carcasses out faster, but it ensures higher marbling within the meat. And Americans have come to associate the flavor of beef with a grain-fed, highly marbled chunk of meat. Whereas grass-fed beef tends to be much more lean and will have a more robust range of flavors depending on what those cows are eating and what time of year they're butchered. Now, there are even levels within grass-fed versus grain-fed. Before I get there, though, one thing to note is that I mentioned that they grow faster on grains. On average, a cow will put on between 2.5 to 4 pounds per day of body weight and finish in 18 to 20 months when fed on grains. When fed on grass, that growing period expands to 24 to 28 months because they're only putting on about 1.5 to 2.5 pounds a day. Now, the rules around labeling grass-fed require that the animal consumes grass for at least 50% of its lifetime diet. What does that mean? That means that you can put a cow out on pasture for the first 15 months of its life and then give it another 4 or 5 months in a feedlot eating nothing but grain, and you can call that cow grass-fed. You can add on grain finished if you want or not, depending on how you want to market that. And it will be almost as marbled and fatty and flavorful as a standard grain-fed cow, steer usually. But is that really a grass-fed animal, or do we need to adjust that labeling even more. Now you can have grass finished where they ate grains during an earlier grow out and then they wanted to finish them on grass to give them that more robust flavor profile. Um, but I guess it all depends on what marketing channels growers want to, or ranchers in this case, want to go down. Um, there's a number of other terms that we could go over. I'm going to get onto one more, a case study of genetically modified, but I'm happy to talk about others as time permits at the end here. But GMOs. This is one I like talking about only because there's a lot of opinions about it, but and I definitely have opinions. I just tend to temper mine when I'm in a professional setting. So you're going to get the tempered opinion. But GMOs are organisms that have had their characteristics changed through the modification of their DNA. They are created through genetic manipulation that does not occur naturally. And I wanted to make sure that I emphasize that because one of the things that GMO supporters do in order to try to shore up their own arguments is say, well, we've been genetically modifying organisms forever. For the last 10,000 years, as we selected for the traits that we liked, we were in essence molding the evolution of this crop and in a sense modifying its genome. Well, that's probably a stretch because we're talking about things that nature can do without us versus GMOs, where you're taking genes from totally different domains of life and injecting them back into plants or animals. So any organism can be genetically modified. If it has DNA, its DNA can be manipulated, but there are laws that exist to restrict genetic modification of humans, even though we can. And there are people out there who are just ready to go to get their own gene gun to modify their own genome to try to make themselves superhuman, but it's not legal. There was a story a couple years ago about a Chinese researcher who had cloned someone, but then also modified some DNA, and I don't know whatever came of that, but it definitely caused it to do for a day or two. What I usually like to do from here is talk about some of the obfuscation, the pro and anti-marketing that's out there about GMO, but I was struggling to get these to play even on my computer, and I don't know if that was a result of kids upstairs streaming something while I was doing it or something else, but rather than try to play these, I'm just going to give you the quick synopsis, and that is this particular video is one that talks about GMO from a negative light, and it will show pictures of syringes being plunged into tomatoes or ears of corn to show that they're being injected with toxic substances, or they're showing these things going in and out of factories to show that they're not grown, when the reality is much more nuanced and far less conspiratorial than the video lets off. It uses keywords like frankenfoods that are trying to evoke an emotional response, all in trying to explain what it is. Now, it does do somewhat of an okay job describing what genetic modification is, but it's got so many clues and images that flash up to make it look like it's this scary thing that it's more appealing to your emotional response than any actual rational sense that you might have. We're going to skip that. The next one is our favorite astronomer, Neil Tyson deGrasse, who does this video vlog, I guess, on the science of GMOs, where he brings in a genetic engineer from University of California at Davis to talk about GMOs. And he does with this scientist the same kinds of obfuscations, but the other way around. He actually mentions we've been genetically modifying plants for the last 10,000 years as we select them. there's a little bit of dismissing the naysayers as being less intelligent in here. There's, again, appeals to emotion through shame or other things that are being put out there. There is information here about what GMs are, but there's also some misinformation about what they are. And so I only bring that up to say that on both sides of this issue, there are people who, whether well-intentioned or not, are using images and words that appeal more to the emotions of their audience than providing simple facts. So what GMOs are out there? There are a number of them, probably far fewer than most people think. And I'm just looking at the plant world here. There are going to be more in the animal world. But in the plant world, there's the 5 top ones. If you're getting soy, corn, cotton, canola, or alfalfa grown in the US, you have a better than not chance that those are going to be GM, or at least have some GM somewhere in their genetic history, because the lion's share of corn and soy especially, and cotton, is all GM. The traits that are in those that are modified, that the genome is modified to express, the vast majority of all the GMs out there are sold so that they're resistant to Roundup. There are other pesticide resistance genes that are engineered into some of these crops. There are other traits like there's a BT trait where the Bacillus thuringiensis bacterium, the toxin that it produces, the mechanism for producing that toxin is engineered into corn and some other products in order for that crop now to express the toxin produced by the bacteria. And that makes them resistant to insect damage and things like that. There's a few other traits out there in the wild and many other a few other crops. So if you've ever eaten apple slices from the kids' meal at Subway, you've probably had a GM apple. The GM apple was developed to turn off the gene that makes the flesh turn brown as it oxidizes after being cut. And that's why those apple slices don't turn brown in the package. They wouldn't be as appetizing if they were brown, right? It also reduces bruising and things like that. Potatoes. Probably the majority of French fries at American fast food restaurants are, if not already, moving towards GM potatoes. There are 2 traits that are bred into potatoes in order to make them to make them more profitable. And those are reducing bruising and reducing browning in the frying process. So potatoes, as you probably know, are mostly starch. However, that starch in time can convert to sugars. As that potato ages, those sugars aid in breaking it down and helping to produce the next generation of potatoes, especially as it gets older. It's shifting to sugars to try to encourage sprouting faster and things like that. But the implications for French fries and potato chips is that the more sugar in the potato in relation to the starch content, the browner those fried products are going to be. So if you ever find a potato chip that's remarkably brown compared to the rest of them, that particular slice of potato probably came from one that had been sitting in the bin longer than everything else. Maybe it got stuck in a corner from the last batch. And so it had just converted more of its starch into sugar. That sugar browns, it caramelizes and browns as it's being fried. And now you have this really dark chip. Nutritionally, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just not what the US, especially consumers, are expecting. And so those dark brown chips and dark brown fries are a bad thing. And so we've engineered them to turn off the genes that convert starch to sugar. And those would be the main potato genes that you would see out there. There's also some resistance to blights and some other things, but by and large, those are the biggest traits going in potatoes. If you like papaya and you eat papaya on any kind of a regular basis, even if you're buying organic papaya, it relies on a genetically modified papaya. There's the leaf hopper. There's a bug that transmits a virus in papaya, and almost 100% of conventional papayas that you can get here in the United States are going to be GM. It won't be completely 100, but unless you're shopping at specialty markets, they're probably going to be GM. And if they are organic, they were probably grown completely surrounded by genetically engineered papayas as a trap crop to try to keep that bug from getting into the organic papayas. There's sweet corn that's got a couple of different traits out there, and summer squash. Um, those two you could possibly purchase at a grocery store, especially if it's at a very, very large scale grocery store chain or monolith headquartered out of Arkansas. Um, mm, I don't know the prevalence for smaller retailers, smaller grocery stores, but the sweet corn and summer squash, there was a broccoli out for a little bit. I don't know that that one is still out, but there is a sweet corn and a summer squash that could be on grocery store shelves. Whether or not it is, Walmart's the only one that I've heard actually say we would sell it, and that was the end of the story. Um, Seeds. When going to the home center and buying seeds, or to the nursery and buying seeds, you cannot buy a GM seed. Could it have some cross-contamination from GM pollen that created that seed? Maybe. But by and large, if you're buying any kind of a seed from any home store or any local nursery, you're probably not able to get GM seeds. In fact, in order to get GM seeds, often it requires signing license agreements and things like that, ensuring that you aren't going to save seed, that you're not going to try to breed with that seed, and you're going to pay a license fee for the GM traits that are on it. It's not something that you can just go to the corner store and buy GM seeds. It's not really possible. So when you see labels on seed packets that say GMO free, it's just a marketing trick. There is no real possibility for you to buy GM seeds unknowingly. So looking at sustainability as a concept, I talked about the USDA's definition of sustainable agriculture. Most people, when they think about sustainability, will think about it on this three-legged model of sustainability that encompasses something like being environmentally sound, being economically viable, and being socially responsible. And what do those things mean? That's actually the real trick. But if, according to your definition and the definition of those people or organizations or other stakeholders of any sort that matter, if you can find consensus on a definition, perhaps you can find your way to the center of that interlinked triple Venn diagram to the sweet spot of true sustainability. And the reason that I put so much equivocation into those terms is that different cultures, different communities have different values around economics, social interactions, environment. And so whether or not something is sustainable here, I'm in Kansas, it may or may not be sustainable to do the same things or use the same products or practice the same practices in Maine or the Dominican Republic or anywhere else in the world, because those systems, including the cultural and social systems, are going to be different enough that I can't say, if you do this, 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 and this, you're sustainable, because it just might not be in the context that you're in. So why am I, again, equivocating here? It's because sustainability has to be very context specific. It's not something that you can just create a checklist and say, if you do these things, you are sustainable. Now, you could probably create a checklist that is vague enough or vague enough that, okay, maybe it works, but it's not going to be really informative from a practical standpoint. Maybe in principles. So, environmentally sound, some people will say that it's not good enough to just go chemical free, but we actually want to enhance the environment as we utilize its resources. And so, just eliminating our negative impacts is probably not enough for at least the group or groups that say that chemical free is not enough. It's not enough to just be chemical free, but we also want to build soil. We want to encourage biodiversity. Um, we want to reconnect ourselves with the environment in ways that I guess that's pushing on social with it. Reincorporate ourselves as members of the ecosystem. Economically sound, it's not enough to just say this operation makes money, but who does this operation make money for? That's not to say that everyone's not entitled to making a living, but if the lion's share of all of the revenue and profit that you generate gets trucked off to another state to enrich the denizens of that state, then perhaps it's not as economically sound as you would think. Um, I guess there's more I could say about that, but we'll just keep moving. Socially responsible. Is it equitable? Is it accessible? And is it just? And I'm not uh, using these terms necessarily in their popular connotation right now, but I don't know if any of you remember the movie from the 70s, Soylent Green. Um, it was a bit of it was a dystopian film starring Charlton Heston, where the primary food products for most of the people on Earth at the time were these, I think they were wafer-like things called Soylent, or from a company called Soylent, and they had different colors that were supposed to have different, I don't know if it was flavors or nutrient. I don't remember. It's been a minute since I watched that movie. Um, but only the rich could access actual real foods. And so at the very beginning of the movie, Charlton Heston, who's a police officer, is investigating a crime, goes up into the apartment to do that investigation. And there's this big lavish spread of fresh fruits and real food and not just Soylent products. And nobody's in the room. And so you see him just kind of pound down a bunch of it because it's something that he doesn't normally get access to. Um, why do I bring up that example? Well, there are definitely foods that are limited to certain classes of economic classes. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, especially if the food system is designed in a way to allow access for those things for everyone. And then there's the question that is often raised to naysayers of conventional ag, and that is, but can underscore feed the world? Can permaculture feed the world? Can organic feed the world? Um, and that one really frustrates me when I hear that question because it's not an honest, genuine question. It's a question meant to deflect criticism, and it doesn't really stand on its merits because even in a farm operation like this one depicted here, these farmers are not feeding the world. Now, they may be shipping some things out to a couple of different countries, but the reality is that all of the US production doesn't feed the world as it stands. And using that argument it's a red herring. But it is important to ask, can whatever it is that we're doing scale? Because to me, it's a real question. If it doesn't scale, can it really be sustainable? Because there's a growing population. And even if the population doesn't continue to grow, if it doesn't scale and we don't have enough people willing to use those techniques, meaning to farm, then we're still kind of in the same boat where we have fewer people to do the work and it has to scale in order to maintain the population. So, how do we know if what we're doing is sustainable? There are a lot of metrics or indicators out there for different sustainability goals. You could look at soil health. You could look at biodiversity. I've seen people throw down squares crafted from PVC pipe and just counted how many different species they find within that square, and then they'll compare it from year to year to see if they're doing better or worse in biodiversity.
It's 8 o'clock.
Water use efficiency, especially important further west where there's less moisture falling from the sky. What's your carbon footprint? Nutrient cycling. There are tools to measure most of these things. And some of them are easy, some of them are less easy to measure, but they're all things that you could take into account in evaluating your own impact and efforts. There are economic indicators. Are you making enough money? Is what you're buying coming from local sources? How resilient are you? How resilient is the farm that you're buying from or the grocery store that you're buying from? Is it going to have produce when you need it? And there's a lot of different ways of measuring the economic outcomes of a system. Similarly, there's going to be indicators or areas to measure social sustainability. Can people who want to farm access land? Is the food that's being grown nutrient dense enough to sustain the population or the health of the people that are eating it? Are we treating our workers well? These are all things that can be done or looked at. So what can you do from home? This was a landscape picture, and the two neighboring properties just have grass. Anybody heard of Food Not Lawns? There's an organization that encourages replacing your front yard grass with food, or your backyard if you're not into the front yard vibe. But it's something that you can do. It's not something that I say you need to do or anything like that. But in evaluating what you hold as the highest values among that sustainability triangle, and then crafting solutions from that, here's just some ideas. So growing food, right? Not just growing food, but learning how to use that food. Not a lot of people, especially Americans, have even seen kohlrabi, let alone used it. And for the ones that have seen it and probably didn't use it because it looks really funky, they probably didn't use it because it looked so funky, and well, they never saw mom or dad or grandma or grandpa cooking with it, and so they didn't venture out of their comfort zone to try it. And kohlrabi is one of my favorite vegetables. It's delicious. I'm not sure that one might be kohlrabi. Could be. It's probably not fennel. Learn how to use whole foods. Whether you grow them or not, learn how to use them because they're going to be the most nutrient dense and probably the most versatile of anything you could get at the grocery store. Grow food wherever you are. One of the things that I've had people that I've said both in classes, workshops, and things like that, and just off the cuff, is that the answer to sustainability is grow something. It doesn't matter where you live. You can put a tomato in a pot or go spend a ridiculous amount of money on a topsy-turvy and hang it upside down from from the eaves of your house, however you want to do it, but grow something. It doesn't have to be a lot. It doesn't have to meet all of your nutritional or culinary needs, but in growing something that you can consume, you have, at least in that tiny little aspect of your existence, balanced the production with the consumption in a way that, if you find a lot of value in that exercise, can multiply, right? Growing that first tomato and actually eating the fruit from it and tasting it and realizing that the stuff at the grocery store has no flavor. It's kind of contagious, and then you want to grow something else and you want to grow something else. And I tell this even to people, I got students, college students who are just living in dorms. I was like, can you put a pot on your desk or in your windowsill and water it, every day or so? If you can do that, you can grow something. And so even people who are extremely space limited can grow something. And it's a good place to start. That, oops, wrong way, might include growing some of your own proteins. I live in a small little tiny town in Kansas that even for the 5,000 residents that we have here in this town are limited to 4 chickens, and none of those can be roosters. So this picture here is not my yard because I would be breaking the law with the 6 chickens that they have in this picture. But I could put 4 in my backyard and, meet maybe a quarter or a fifth of my weekly egg requirement. Um, Now, personally, I don't currently because only having 4 chickens, there's a cost involved in raising one chicken that or 4 chickens that just doesn't pencil out for getting the eggs. And we have friends with more space and fewer rules that can grow many more chickens and can produce eggs a whole lot more efficiently and effectively than we can. And so we have friends that we get our eggs from. Same with milk. Definitely not putting a cow on our little third of an acre lot, but we do buy raw milk from a local farm. And then don't just throw it away, but put it back out in the soil. It used to be that hundreds, not even hundreds, 100 years ago, everything was going back into the garden. Whether that was from the kitchen table or from the outhouse, everything was going back into the garden. And as a result, previous generations were capable of growing far more than we are now. Now, that's not to say that we can't grow just as much now, but by and large, we're doing it with additional inputs that sound like Miracle Grow or other products simply because we don't realize that we have access to a wealth of nutrients right in our kitchens. And so I would encourage you to consider composting. There's outdoor composting, there's worm composting, but going back to this previous picture, I don't know that this is an actual bokashi or bokashi crock that they're using, but there's, I believe it's Korean, Japanese or Korean technique of basically fermenting your kitchen waste on the kitchen counter prior to putting it into the compost pile. And that's supposed to supercharge your compost, which worms don't like it like this. If you fed, I mean, the worms would love this, but as soon as they start doing their work, it's going to get really hot. They're all going to either cook or leave. And so once it's already been composted, feeding it to worms is a great way of processing out some of the potential bad bacteria or fungi that might show up in your compost. Um, but worms are great. They do great things to the structure of the soil that results from your compost if you can keep them in there. Getting them too wet, too hot, there's a lot of, I'm just saying this because I've failed at worms every time I've tried. Get kids out there into the garden, whether you are in the stage where you have kids at home, grandkids that visit, get them out, getting their hands dirty. It's good for the soul, and it's good to get kids interested and involved in growing things and connecting with their food and connecting with their environment as early as possible. So get kids involved as early as possible to start that next generation off right. Um, and if you can't do any of it yourself, support a local farmer or support many local farmers because without them, we're limited to only what is available through large scale conventional ag, whether you like it or not, unless you're going to support the small farmer, that's going to be the only option. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking and see if we have questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. And yeah, the floor is open.